Welcome to day 2 of the Virtual Training Institute. My name is Ellen Beatty from the State Office and Team Labor. So welcome to our final session on this Tuesday. I'd like to point out, if you haven't been in a session yet, we can use the chat box to communicate with you as participants. But for you to communicate with us as the presenters and the facilitators, we're going to need you to use the questions box. So if you have comments for us, you can place them there and we will be able to see them. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our final session today, Design and Implementation of Distance Learning ESL. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Ashley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer and my friend Ashley.
Hi there.
Here. Hi. Okay. So what we're going to present today is design and implementation of distance learning for ESL students. Ashley and I teach at Frederick Community College in the Adult Ed program. We teach English learners. We have found that that there really isn't much in the lines of coincidence for us. It's more of being prepared for things to come. In the fall of 2019, our leadership addressed us and asked us to take a chance with a pilot program so that we could try to meet the needs of our English learners who were having difficulty attending classes physically. A lot of our students have 2 or 3 jobs and are unable to attend classes even if we arrange flexible schedules. So Ashley and I both said we would go ahead and go for it. And so then we spent a lot of time planning and thinking about what we might do. So you see a link before you, this PDF, you'll have a copy of our presentation and you can refer back to it. This link shows you the document that we used. We began looking at where had people gone with virtual learning before we began to try to design our program.
Yeah, because we didn't have any distance learning ESL programs at the time at FCC, and so we didn't have our own models to pull from. So we really used that article as a starting off point.
And we think that it's important to kind of look at things that historically have been proven to work and also take an innovative mindset and look at what meets the learner of today. So as we were doing that, we kind of considered all different types of materials that we could use, what platforms we would use, and we looked into various resources.
Which we will share with you today.
Okay, and so what we ended up going with was English Discoveries. This was a program that Baltimore Community College had used, and they put us in touch with Stuart Holtz, who is the rep for that program. And we compared it to a couple of other programs that we had seen, and we felt like this program would be compatible with the hybrid version that we had originally intended our program to be. We had, before COVID hit, this was going to be a hybrid program.
That's right, and just for reference, we had previously used programs like the Ventures Arcade and the Cambridge online resources and Burlington English. And so we already had access to those, but we felt like for a completely or at least mostly online class, each of those platforms was lacking something. So that's why one of the reasons why we went here.
Yes. So you'll see a slide in front of you for Intermediate 1, and this is an actual clip that was taken from one of the student screens, and you can see that it gives you, oh, I see a question. Yeah, Ashley, can you read the question?
I am not.
Okay, I thought I heard a question. I apologize. I heard a ding and thought maybe it might be someone asking a question. If, as a matter of fact, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and I'll pause to see if I can answer questions, or maybe Ashley might have the answer. to the question.
No
We'd like
question.
this presentation to be as interactive as possible.
Mhm.
So this slide shows you what a screen would look like if you were logged in as a student. It shows the course completion, the average test score, and time on task. Students, you have a couple of options. You can assign all of the units to students where they do reading activities, reading, listening, and writing activities, or you can pick and choose specific activities that you would like for students to cover. And the way that we designed our program, we decided that we wanted our students to interact with one another based off of things that they were doing in the program. So we went through every unit that our students might possibly use, and we looked for connections, and so we assigned specific units to them.
Yeah, so you'll see the top two there are locked. You know, that just the one access is open at that point. But one of the main reasons why we really kind of chose this program is because it's so important in the ESL program, and you know, the funding for our program, that we be able to show what our students are doing and verify. And when you're doing online classes, that's not always easy. So this program offered us an automatic option that would track how long the students were in actively working, you know, so they couldn't just kind of put it on in the background. Hopefully that's not what they did. But no, you could really tell between all of the different metrics. It was a useful tool for us. I mean, I can't really imagine it, but we also use this as just kind of part. We didn't want it to be totally based on this textbook, much like a regular class wouldn't be all reading and using one textbook.
Right, this was just one component of the entire program that we designed. And so students would log on to this program for their individual work. We had, and we'll get into that slide in just a moment, but we had activities where they collaborated, and we'll talk more about those in a moment. But this was their independent piece. And at Frederick Community College, one of the ways that we track students is through time that they spend in the classroom. Well, when you're in a virtual environment, that doesn't translate one for one. And like Ashley said, this particular program provided that component for us, but it's also a really good program. It allows students to listen and take comprehension tests, and there are a variety of ways that the students test. They don't just do all multiple choice. There are lots of different ways that they interact with this program.
I think we have some more just snapshots of what kind of the students were dealing with when they were engaged with this program.
So, and if you look at this snapshot, you'll see that there is a video, and in this video, the two women would have a conversation. The student would listen to that conversation and then interact with the program. This is just one way that they might be asked questions about what went on in the conversation. There are also ways that they can practice. If you notice the highlighted area, so they could highlight any part of the text and then practice speaking that dialogue. And then, so if they entered into the program another time and came back to this exact same screen, they might be offered a different question that goes with that dialogue, so that they have multiple opportunities to practice these skills in a variety of ways.
Exactly. And during the practice portion, they have the option of bringing out that transcript, which is what you're seeing. But when you go into the test or the quiz functions, it might be parts of the same video or similar conversation, but then they take that away. So they've got that scaffolding built in.
Okay, and one of the other wonderful things about the program is that they could access, it's web-based, and they could access it on their phones and on iPads, and they could access it on a computer. And so that was really important because a lot of our students don't have computers, but they do have cell phones.
Yeah, and a lot of our students also would engage with our class when they were on break from work, or when they were kind of running around doing errands, or, you know, kind of sitting in that in-between time they had. So we really wanted them to have something that they could use on a device that they already owned and were comfortable with.
Okay, so we have this big help. So we say hats off and kudos to our leadership, because it was very much a collaborative project. While Ashley and I did a lot of planning for what we would do with the students and how it might be delivered, behind the scenes, our leadership, they were procuring funding and making sure that they made contact with students and promoting the program. And so it was very much a group effort.
Yeah, and they also helped us kind of identify students that were already or had previously been involved with the ESL program at our college, and then had, either encountered attendance issues or something had happened, and so they could no longer come to that schedule. So it was really an attempt to better serve our current students.
Yes, and so it actually we began design in November and didn't begin implementation until January. So we had quite a bit of time to actually explore from multiple perspectives before we began the program. And so what you see now is our distance matrix. In this matrix, we considered our students, the students that we had coming into the class. We wanted to be able to make a program that we could provide to all levels of students. However, we knew that going in, given that it was a pilot program, that we needed to first offer it to students that might have some technology skills so that we could work with them collaboratively and learn. And I feel confident that if we opened up now, after having had this experience, we might be able to introduce this same concept with a variety of learners. But we found it helpful to work with, in a pilot program, learners that had a little bit of technology skills, so that we were not having to spend so much time working on that, given that we could not always be available to our students. Remember, it was all, well, and you're now in that same type of environment where it's all online, and we wouldn't have opportunities to step through a lot of the program with students. So we had intermediate to advanced students. And in this matrix, you'll see that we had the alignment of the units, and then we broke it out into terms. We had term 1, which we called it terms because we wanted to start trying to incorporate vocabulary that they would become familiar with as they transitioned from the ESL program into true college courses. And so using the word term kind of gets that mindset, so that when it's used in the classroom, they're not having to relearn a lot of the vocabulary. And then we designed these unit projects. The unit projects were the collaborative piece. First, they would do a presentation where they introduced one another, and then they worked together collaboratively to create slides to compare and contrast their home countries. And then they made videos, which actually ended up going along really well with COVID, but we had intended it to match with our units that were in the English discoveries, but they had a dialogue with one another, asking and giving advice. So we tried to have activities that they worked on together that had practical application. Ashley, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I agree.
Okay. Anyone have any questions?
We did get a question about cost, and so I was trying to find some resources, but as I mentioned, on being on the instructor side, we don't necessarily get involved in the budget. I will tell you, it worked from our standpoint is that we had a small pilot program. Our goal was 10 students. We ended up having 6 or 7. And so they purchased only 10 licenses, so that our students, I think that were in the program in January, still have access for a little while longer, but they definitely kind of kept it contained, at least until we got familiar with the program and would use that information to decide whether to use it in the future as well.
Okay, so this slide shows you the resource inventory. If you notice, it's all Google. We did that on purpose because we had a group of learners who had never worked online before, and this was new for them. And then we were new to it as teachers, even though we had both had done some online work. Presenting in an online fashion was new. We were used to working with students in the classroom. So we didn't want our students having to learn a lot of different programs in addition to the content. And we felt like if we stuck with Google, then it would be easy to transition between the apps. All the menus would be similar and they would be used to certain icons because we were working with English learners who, you don't want them to be bogged down and stressed about the technology, because the whole point is that they're learning the academic language.
Or just having to log in, right? Sometimes that can take 30 to 45 minutes of a class if that's your first time in a computer lab setting. So we really tried to be mindful about the fact that the students spending more time on their studies than trying to access the studies. And the Google Suite went along with our goal of having our class resources available on multiple devices. So if the students wanted to work primarily on their phone or a tablet, these would allow them to do that as well.
Yes, so we found that Google was very user-friendly for all of us. We did end up using Google Hangouts throughout the class. We originally only planned to use Google Hangouts as needed, but it kind of evolved into something that the students enjoyed, and we used it to meet with them once a week, where we would have a dialogue and they could practice the language, the vocabulary that they were learning. And then when COVID hit, it became a way for people to release the stress of all of the factors that were going on. We had people who were just simply tired of being trapped indoors, to those that were concerned about family members and loved ones in their home countries. So the Google Hangout was a way to transform our classroom from just being this asynchronous thing into a synchronous unit. And I feel like our students really enjoyed that aspect. They had come to rely on it. One of our students commented to me that she made her family stay away because she knew on Thursdays she would have conversation with her teachers.
They really did. We had a kind of a set conversation hour, and then we also had a set like instructional period. So the students knew what it was. It was posted on the calendar. And they really encouraged one another to tune in, so to speak. So this was pre-Zoom everything, or go-to meeting. We really just intended it to be a conversational, informal piece that became actually an integral part of our class.
And one of the things that I want to point out is the bullet number 5, where you look at the Google Voice. That is a nice resource if you want to be able to communicate with your students through like text messaging or voicemail, and you don't want to give out your personal number. And and then you can also send group text, and that was a very helpful piece as well. And then you also can track the kinds of communication that you're having with yourself and with students.
Yeah, and we extended that option to them as well. Part of our orientation with the first meeting, apart from introducing them to this and English Discoveries, was having that discussion. You all will be expected to communicate. If you do not feel comfortable sharing your personal information, let's get you set up with Google Hangouts and Google Voice so you can interact through those channels.
Yes, so digital citizenship is something that we probably should have highlighted early on. So helping students to see the reason why we're going to behave responsibly sometimes is more necessary in some environments than others. It wasn't an issue for us, but I have heard some stories, and so this would be one way to combat that. Let's see. Okay, so some additional resources. We talked about Really, Ashley and I felt like co-teaching was super beneficial for this program, because when we originally began, as we said, it was a pilot program. Our students weren't used to the adjustment, and because they had access to us in ways outside of the classroom, we would get text messages from anywhere like 2 in the morning till late at night, and we were constantly trying to answer those questions in real time. So eventually, go ahead.
Especially at the beginning when, they're learning the technology, a lot of them will be like, oh, can you help me? I'm having trouble with English discoveries, or what does this mean? Or I can't find that assignment. And because our students are juggling so many things, and we knew that going in, we really wanted to be able to respond to them when they could work on it. Which, as you know, as a teacher, that's not always an option. But with two of us, it really made a huge difference, because if I couldn't get to it, she could, and vice versa. And we really appreciated that. Moving forward, we were like, I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
Yeah, we even, before we started, we gave them a calendar so that they could track. And in that we stated, these are our office hours, but I don't think they quite understood that. And so as time went by, we did realize that we were repeating a lot of information to the students. So we started our own YouTube channel, and we both have equal access to it, and we still use it even with other classes. So we will create instructional videos for things that we consider to be simple, but then if you think of an English learner who doesn't know, use your tracking pad or your mouse pad, click here, and just that dialogue itself might not be familiar to them. Imagine trying to remember that without the teacher present. So we created videos to help walk them through either the Google Suite or English Discoveries or any other activity that we asked them to do. We would model it through the YouTube videos.
Okay.
And go ahead.
I think we have a few questions. I'm not seeing them at the moment. We're through technology as we speak. I'm not seeing any in my questions option, Ellie.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a ton of questions.
Wonderful. We'll stop then.
Yeah, let's pause for a minute. Let me go back.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
So one question is, how did students work collaboratively?
Oh, okay. Well, let me go back to that slide where we had our matrix. I think that kind of helps for you to see that bit. Can you see where my cursor is pointing? If I move my cursor around, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so where you see the top half of this matrix, those are the units that go with the English Discoveries independent work. And then down here, you see unit projects. So we have 3 different unit projects that we used for students specifically for them to work collaboratively. So given that Google Drive is designed, and Google Classroom, which was the platform we used for some of our interaction, has all of these apps that you can share with other people. So one person would create the slides and others could import their slides in or add them to them as they were able. So
go ahead. We'll have examples of this later on as well. So we actually included real examples of our students' work, so you could get a feel for what they accomplished together.
Right.
But yeah, we build this in just as you would in kind of a typical college level course, right? The group project expectation is built in automatically.
Yes.
So kind of a follow-up question to that, did students find it hard to find a convenient time to work together on the projects?
Well, what's wonderful about that is, given that it's in a Google Drive, they can work asynchronously. So if Ashley and I were working on a project, as a matter of fact, we did this quite frequently, she would work on it during the time when she was available, and then I would work on it on the time when I was available, and then we would have dialogue about how we felt the product was looking. So you can do it both synchronously and asynchronously.
Yeah, we did encounter some issues kind of with that beginning, you have that beginning conversation about what you want to do. And generally, if there was a student there, you know how they are in groups. One always emerges as the leader. And so that student would communicate back, unofficially, of course, they would communicate back to us and say, hey, I'm having trouble reaching so-and-so. And then we would get out and try to see if we could help connect, or if there was something else going on that was interfering with their schoolwork. But for the most part, they worked really well together. Like, we had a little classroom family emerge by the end of this.
Yes, as a matter of fact, they definitely were. They just, yeah, we were very, very blessed to have a very cohesive group. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'll go back to
your question.
Yes.
Okay, so quite a few more questions. You mentioned starting in November. What was the teaching time frame?
Okay.
So it was, we've got the calendar. So it started at the end of January and ran until May, mid-May. So it was designed to coordinate with our Saturday sessions. So we have Saturday sessions, approximately 4 hours a week, Saturday mornings for, what's that, like 5 months or so, just so they can get that. So we used that as a template for our class.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the matrix because I really feel like this piece, this is the part that we worked on when we met to design the program. Because I'm going to move my cursor around and you can kind of follow along. If you notice at the top here, we have this 32 hours. What we did is we looked at how many hours students, coming down here to the very bottom, now you'll see 60 hours. Students were supposed to accumulate around 60 hours in class time, class hours. And so what Ashley and I did is we looked at how does that translate into a virtual environment. So a lot of times we just looked at, okay, how long would it take for a person to create a presentation? How much time should they be spending on these independent projects? And we assigned hours instead of grades, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we have a sample rubric we'll present later on as well.
Okay, a question about the Google tools that perhaps it's about a slide. It says you have 8 Google tools listed, but there were 15 icons shown. So they're mentioning that they're not familiar with all of those tools. So are there any that you want to highlight and maybe explain for people who don't use them on a regular basis?
Well, the purple one is Sheets, which we intended to use, but with like most things last in the spring semester, it kind of got away with us, and we didn't get a chance to do that. One is just the calendar, which we did provide a calendar, and I guess our calendar was in Google Sheets, so in some sense we used it. One is Chrome, which that kind of went with our digital literacy, right? We talked about using secure browsers and that kind of thing.
Let's see, I'll go ahead and see if I can touch the ones you're talking about. I apologize. Okay, so here we are. Okay, go ahead.
Right, I believe that's just Chrome. So we talked about that one. Google Plus, right, that's the red one. We don't have that. One of them is also Google Meets, which we don't have. So just full disclosure, we did not have kind of the paid subscription through the institution. We were all, including Jennifer and myself, we were just using the free versions of the apps, including our Google Classroom.
And we're all familiar with reducing cost is on the forefront of all of our minds. So that's what we try to do. We intentionally tried to keep costs down for this program because we didn't want it to be a barrier to repetition. And then can you speak a little bit more about Google Voice? Google Voice is easy to set up. So if you go to your Google Drive, I don't know how, you'd have to be vaguely familiar to understand this, but what's wonderful about Google is when you leave this webinar, you can just go to your Google search and you can put in Google Voice, and there are actually step-by-step approach to it, but I'll explain it to you. So Google Voice is just an app within the Google Suites. So once you have, if you sign up for a Google Gmail account, then you have access to the full range of free programs offered through Google Suites. And Google Voice is one of those. You just have to go down the menu, down through all of the icons, and it's toward the bottom of the icons where you might find your Google Classroom. And you click on it, and it's menu driven, and then you just sign up for an account. And I get messages to my phone, and so it assigns a new phone number to you. So your students do not get to use your phone, but it will dial your cell phone and tell you that you have a message or you have a caller, or they can just leave messages, and it works kind of just like you would have an app if you have, I have an iPhone or Android where you have the apps and it's interactive in that way. Any other questions?
That looks like about it for now.
Okay.
Just maybe one last one. How did you use Google Hangouts? Oh, but you mentioned that you didn't use Google Hangouts.
Oh, yes, we did. We used Google Hangouts. We didn't use Google Meets.
Oh,
Google Meets
yeah.
is new to us, but we use Google Hangouts quite a bit. We actually just created a group in Google Hangouts so that, you know, Ashley and I both talked about how we wanted just one login, and we wanted everything to be pretty menu driven for students who were not familiar with technology. So we created a link in Google Hangouts that connected all of our students through, and they gave us the numbers that they wanted us to use, or the email accounts that they wanted us to use, and they could click on the link or choose not to click on the link. So if you clicked on the link, you could join the group, or if they hailed you and you would get kind of like, instead of a phone call, you get a message that you tell it's a different signal than a phone call coming in, and you can choose not to answer if you don't want to join the group. It doesn't continually try to reach you. Once you decide you don't want to be in the group, it stops asking you to join. And so students were able to just click on that link each week and have conversations with us.
Yep, and it was definitely one of those things that ended up kind of being a precursor to Zoom, because again, we started talking about this in last November. So we really had no inkling of what was about to come. But that link turned out to be kind of a great way. We could post it in their classroom, or we could send it to them. And then many of the students decided to download the Google Hangouts app, where they would actually get a phone call. But it doesn't always kind of work that way. It's not like a traditional phone call. So we tried to schedule them in advance so they would know when to be ready and when to be picking up.
Yes. And like Ashley said, we've had people have Hangouts with us on their break at work. They've joined groups. We've had some students with us while other students were on, at their place of employment or some other area. And so it just kind of pulled the classroom together in a way that I think that just strictly asynchronous learning just doesn't quite do.
Yeah, that's always been one of our primary benefits we've said at FCC is, it's our teachers, it's our classroom interactions. It's very much intangible. And so we were concerned about how we were going to preserve that in an online setting. And I think kind of all of these combinations of things really enabled us to do that.
Yes, we actually had one of our students, because we were doing a pilot program, we interviewed them midway to see how things were going. One of our students told us that she felt like being able to meet with us online opened up her world, because she said since she had come from her country coming to the United States where she didn't speak the language, that she felt isolated. And she said, I no longer feel that way. I feel like now I know that I can talk to someone. And so we were just, that was kind of one of those pleasant little surprises that we learned from that. So you're now looking at resource inventory, if everybody's ready to move on from Google. So we talked about co-teaching, and we definitely still say that that's our number one resource. And then the creating the videos, English discoveries we talked about for independent work. And then we added in the working with the news. We wanted, like we said before, we always wanted the activities that we were doing with students to be purposeful and meaningful. And the best way to learn language is to have it situated within something that you're going to use. And so we had students using different news sources, whether it was leveled news sources. You'll see the first two news sources that we have listed, those are leveled news sources. So students can access the news in a variety of levels, whether it's a first year, a person who has very little English skills to someone who has more advanced skills. And then we also said, you know, if there is something in the news that you want to talk about that's not in some of the leveled programs that we're suggesting, by all means, please feel free to explore it. So once the students explored the news, then they would journal and share that in the Google Classroom for commentary from the rest of the group.
And we had just, you know, it was an additional option that we wanted to give the students who, you know, maybe weren't engaging as much with English discoveries or were looking for other ways to extend their learning. And just as you might expect with kind of the optional pieces, we had some students that really took advantage of it and they liked that type of activity, so they did it more. And then we had other students that maybe tried it once or twice and then moved on because that wasn't their thing, or maybe they felt they were getting reading practice elsewhere. But we thought it was a good inclusion, and you know, we're still glad that we included that in our matrix.
Yes, and so one of the things that we kept wanting to do too is to have a flexible program where students had lots of options, because flexibility was important to these students who were working multiple jobs and couldn't come to classrooms. We wanted them to be able to have many opportunities to gain those hours that they needed. We didn't want them to feel like they had to spend all day just doing independent English discoveries, or that if somehow they weren't able to collaborate quite as well with the group, that they were going to be dinged. So we tried to build in not really extra credit, but just more opportunities for students to learn in a variety of contexts. All right. And if you notice that we have our last thing, we have Adobe Creative Suite. Ashley works, her profession is design, and I can't explain it like she could, but she has Adobe Creative Suite. It is a nice added piece, but it's not necessary, but it is something that we used. We also used QuickTime to do our recordings that we uploaded to YouTube. If you have a Mac, you have QuickTime, but if you don't have a Mac, you can always use something like Screencast-O-Matic. That's an easy one and it's free. Ashley, do you know of others?
Yeah, there's a couple of software options like that we talked about previously, and I just kind of, both Jennifer and myself we're all Apple everything, and so we you know, made the decision early on that we were just going to use the screen recording feature built into our devices automatically, and that's the main reason why I used the Adobe Creative Suite, was to put the videos together and to kind of make the clips that we could share.
Yeah, and it was nice because Ashley has the ability to clip and splice and things that were kind of cleaned up our videos, but those are not necessary. You know, those are nice added features, but I don't want you to shy away from creating a YouTube video that might help your student just because you don't feel like it's clean and polished. Our students were happy with the polished ones, and they were happy with the ones where we made mistakes. So feel free to continue to use it. And we're not trying to say that, you know, you need to use one method or another. Does anybody have any questions about this slide before I move on?
I can't see anything.
Let's see. Can you share your journal template?
Do we have that in here?
Yep. So we're almost to the example portion.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm getting there.
All right. Were students at a disadvantage if they didn't have an Apple?
Oh no,
computer?
no.
We
Like
were
we
the
said,
only people that had it. So we did teach the students how to do screen recordings, who had kind of the iPhones. And I actually don't think that we encountered anybody for that particular lesson that didn't, because we didn't have to look it up. So we were beneficial in that sense. We were benefited, but we didn't make it a prerequisite whatsoever.
no. So some of our students actually checked out old machines from our school, and they were all Windows driven. They weren't Macs. So they could use a variety of devices. And that was something that we built in to try to make the program flexible. We wanted to lower cost using things that were free, and we wanted it to have flexibility. Are there more questions?
Just a request to turn off the ding.
Oh, I'm not sure how to do that.
That's me. I'm sorry. My computer is not letting me update anything right now. Because it's being annoying.
Okay,
Sorry,
well, sorry about that. So we're looking at right now, this is a clip from the Google Classroom that we used. If you notice, there's Ashley and a message to our students. So this was our message board. We used the Google Classroom to assign work. If you look at the tab, the stream is kind of like if you're familiar with let's say Twitter or Facebook, where you have your main message board where you can type messages to one another. So the stream is kind of like that. And then the classwork is a place that allows you to assign specific work to students. You can assign things in document form. You can create tests. You can assign slides. You can assign a variety of work through the classwork, and the students submit the work through there, and you can grade it and give them feedback. You can see their progress. And so we felt like Google Classroom, we were already vaguely familiar with that, and that we could incorporate it. And like we said, it went along with Google, and a lot of our students had used this when they were in the physical classroom. So we incorporated that piece into our distance learning, and it would be easy for anyone. I know that a lot of teachers in public school use Google Classroom.
Yeah, we did get some questions about Blackboard, but we didn't have access to Blackboard. And most students weren't overly discouraged by that. They were fine with the Google Classroom.
A lot of our students, their children were using it at home, so they liked that. And we actually had one mom who kind of got into competition with her son about exceeding his ability with technology. So that was kind of fun. So if you look at this page, that's that purple icon that someone asked about earlier. This is where Ashley created a calendar where students were able to kind of pace themselves. If you notice, we had specific meetings or deadlines, but we also had little hints about how far along they should be and what progress they should be making. And we had this calendar available to them. Over to the side where you see the cute little dog, we also created a sheet that was a running tabulation of the different activities and assignments that they needed to complete. So while our program was not Blackboard, we kind of tried to give that same kind of feel. Any more questions?
No.
Okay. All right, so if you look here, this is our journal for where the students were working with English discoveries. So on this side, you'll see it says vocabulary word, meaning, and then an example of how it's used. Now, they could use an example from English discoveries, or they could create one of their own. We tried to let this be something that was a tool for them and less of a grade. The students picked their own vocabulary from the unit that they were working in. They would put their name, the unit they were working in, and the date. These are actual de-identified examples from our students. And then they had an opportunity where they could talk about why what they had read, write a paragraph about it, and give us some dialogue about the answer choices that they were making while they were testing during English discoveries. And this helped students that were having difficulty processing and were scoring low when they tested after the reading and listening activities. And they found that just by adding this piece, their vocabulary improved. I would say that you kind of need to warn some students if you have overachievers. We had one student that had like a journal of words, and so we told them to try to focus on 5 to 10 words per week instead of every word that they didn't know.
Yeah.
And so this is an example of the interaction that students would have with the news articles. We borrowed this idea from Newsella, the chats. So it's connections, the parts that don't make sense, the advice, the thoughts, and the summary. And so students would read and respond to the news by just answering questions that prompted them to think about what they'd read. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay.
No.
All right. So this is day one. If you notice, we have a large range of, we have someone who typed an entire paragraph to someone who was writing with their pencil tool. And so this is, we felt like these examples kind of showed you where we started and where we ended with the program. And so students from day one had to work in groups. We met in person the first time when we assigned all the equipment and got them registered and ready to start working with the program and made sure that they could log on. We had kind of an orientation. And at that point, they met other members of their class and they exchanged phone numbers and contact information. They had the Google Hangouts link and they were to work with one another. And the goal was for students to find out information about their partner and then introduce that partner to the rest of the class. And this is the result. So even though this was not one of the assignments on the matrix, as you see, you could always assign extra activities and maybe give them 1 or 2 points, because this is kind of like an icebreaker. And so this actually was one of their first assignments that we did have on the matrix. I want to say grade, but we really didn't. I don't know that you want to call it grade. We assigned hours for this project.
We evaluated, yes.
Yes, yeah. Evaluated. So, so the presentation, the compare contrast presentation was completed in Google Slides, and students collaborated on the slide. It's kind of like if you think of PowerPoints, and one person created the slides and then others contributed to it. And so I think the next slide is actually the end result. So these are the actual, this is one of our groups. This is the actual end product of their collaboration. And now keep in mind that these are English learners and who had never used this technology. And so we were really amazed at the final product for these students. And they spent a lot of time individually on it, the asynchronous, adding their information, but they also called one another to clarify and to add pointers on how to update the slides, what colors they wanted to use, what color schemes. And I think it really turned out to be a nice project.
Yeah. I think it's probably a good time to point out that those office hours that we had at the beginning of class, we'll call it the pre-COVID era, we extended that. So when we would have a project like this, some students would text us or they would show up to say, hey, can you help me on this specific project? I don't know how to start, or I don't know how to share. So in addition to the online resources and the YouTube videos, we did provide hands-on assistance. And many of those classes, we were both there, but if not, one of us was there pretty much every Saturday to be available to our students.
Okay, and so we did create a rubric. So even though we didn't give official grades, we wanted a standard because we felt like that was important. We didn't want students to feel like they were doing all of this work and it really didn't matter. And I feel like sometimes you get haphazard kind of slap together information if you don't give some importance to what they're doing. And so we provided a rubric for the students so that they could see what was required to receive a good score on their projects. So 1 would be they just turned it in, and 5 would be exceeding our expectations. And so we looked at content, we looked at whether or not we could make sense of the slides. You know, and then in some groups you might have one, like Ashley said earlier, one person that pulls out as the leader. So did the entire class work on the project? You'd have collaboration, and then the grammar and mechanics. And those things were, some of those were self-evident, some of those were reports from students, some of those were, as you remember, I talked about Google Classroom, where you can check in on their projects. So you can see their project even if they haven't submitted the work yet.
And so, and a lot of them worked on it kind of independently before they combined it, especially for that first Google slide presentation, because they weren't quite familiar with it. They weren't sure how to combine everything and work within the same Google Doc or Google Slides. So we could see what they were doing individually, and then it was really nice at the end to see it all finally come together, because we were checking in every week. We would do weekly check-ins kind of with each other and on the students' work that we could see, just to make sure.
Okay, and I know I'm trying to keep track on time. I know that people may have some questions. I know that troubleshooting is always a question and a concern. Some of the problems we ran into, we needed microphones for the speaking part of English discoveries, and we had to try to work on that piece. I don't feel like that one was resolved as much, but we suggested that we could get, using IT support. There were some YouTube links on how to use your microphone. Some students found that once they got the splitter for the older computers that they were using, then their microphones worked fine. Student communication, we've covered that. Internet access is a huge deal, especially when we start talking about equity in homes where people don't always have computers, much less Wi-Fi. So we did have some of those issues, and fortunately we had students who were willing to go to the local McDonald's or Starbucks when they were all open, and they used those Wi-Fi connections that were free, or the library. Unfortunately, now with COVID state, I'm not real sure about that access, whether or not McDonald's and those places are still offering it. But I do know that there are some websites, if you just do a Google search of companies that are offering hotspots for a reduced cost or free for a limited time to families that need those kinds of supports. We talked about scheduling, and I know we've addressed COVID quite frequently. Does anyone have any questions?
Just one clarification as to what you used for the online classroom.
That was Google Classroom. Google
Yes.
Classroom was the hub. It's where we would post the assignments. They would turn in those projects that we mentioned. We also did the check-ins that Jennifer mentioned. So every time we had a Google Hangout, one of us would recap it in the classroom stream, say who was there, what we discussed, so that students also didn't feel excluded in any way if their schedule wouldn't allow them to make it.
Yes, so we try to create threads through everything that we were doing with the students and things that they were doing independently, so that they were able to link up in Google Classroom as well as Google Hangouts. So those were the two major ways that we interacted with the students: Google Classroom and Google Hangouts.
And then I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this question, but have there been cases of students in ESL classes who are better equipped in technology than our average college student?
Ooh. That's a great question.
I'm not sure. I know that some of my students, if they can, because Google does allow you to translate into your own language, that they have been able to work with that technology, because as you know, Google is worldwide. So that was another reason why we chose that, is because a lot of our students were familiar with Google before we ever saw them.
Yeah, I think it's probably interesting to note that it's what we observe as the teachers can be very different from what the student experience actually is. Because we did those interviews during midterm, we actually learned about another student that we thought was extremely comfortable online. She emerged as a leader. She was logging a lot of time on task online in the system. She said that she really struggled, and one of the reasons why she spent so much time was that she was trying to figure everything out. But you could see a very, very marked difference between her when she came into the class and her when she left. So I feel totally comfortable that she'll be more advanced than the average college student by the end of our class.
Oh yeah, I think she's the one that said it leveled the playing field between her and her son. Her son used to kind of put her down and say, well, you don't speak English, Mom. You don't know what you're talking about. And she was like, now I'm teaching him how to use the technology.
Was
So
making videos. It was a great experience. I think we have one more slide, maybe.
I think this was, oh, there it is.
Teacher.
So our goals were to create a strong foundation that would allow us to extend distance learning, ESL, to new levels and locations with the help of a strong network of leadership and educators. And we cannot express enough that we felt like this was a collaborative activity, not just between Ashley and I, but our leadership and our students as well. I think that when our students came together and supported one another, that kind of created that whole solid foundation.
A question about, did you ever see the faces of your students?
Yes, Google Hangouts.
Yep, all the time.
And we met them in person.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and most of them use the video screens.
And a question about English Discovery's website. Is there a way to view the content before you purchase?
Yes, actually you can. Okay, go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry, so what we did is we actually got a demo version. So basically we reached out to the representative. He did a walkthrough of what the program looked like with us first, with us as teachers and with our leadership team before we moved forward with anything. And then Jennifer and I had demo access for about a month before they purchased, just to try it, go in, play around, and see how we liked it. So from what I know, that's their general practice. So if you're interested in learning more and kind of navigating it, we'd be happy to provide Stuart's information. I guess I don't think he'd mind. He was
He wouldn't. We do encourage you to add other things as well. We feel like while it's a strong program, that having that, I want to go back to that collaborative piece, the piece where the teachers are interacting. That's such it's such a needed component. If you're going to be a classroom, you have to create a sense of community. And I felt like being able to interact with our students more really created unity.
Okay, and then here's maybe the last question.
Okay.
Question about Journal for English Discoveries. Did you list new words in the journal template and let students enter their names and how they were processing or understanding the meaning of those words? I was unable to understand the format.
Oh, that's fine. So no, students actually accessed the unit themselves, and then they would put in vocabulary that they were having trouble with, vocabulary that they wanted to learn, or vocabulary that they felt was connected to the unit. This was meant for them. It was less about show the teacher I know this vocabulary and more about this is a place for me to record vocabulary that I want to remember. I'm sure you could do it either way, especially if you have lower level learners. You might want to go through a unit and pick out vocabulary yourself, but that's not how we used it. We wanted it to be more like a personal journal for the students.
And there was one example that we provided that was, you know, standard for all of them. And most of them just kind of took it and ran with it as they would. Anything else? All right, well, thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully you got something. And, you know, like Jennifer mentioned, we'll be sure to share this presentation. You'll have access to the links. And if there's anything else, feel free to reach out to us directly.
Yes, thank you so much for attending. We appreciate you.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley and Jennifer. What a fantastic presentation. So for all of our participants, thank you for sticking with us until 6 o'clock. I have added a feedback summary in the chat box. If you would please take a few minutes to fill that out. This is our second virtual training institute, and in the spirit of continuous improvement, we'd like to know how we can better serve you. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Ashley and Jennifer, for a fantastic presentation. We look forward to seeing all of you back here tomorrow for another 10 or 11 presentations. Have a great night.
Thanks.